You raised this intuition that if an animal has maybe an absolutely wonderful life, it might be permissible to eat it. I spoke to Martha Nussbaum about her recent book, Justice for Animals, and I think she raised the possibility that it might be permissible to eat animals if they are so constituted that they are not capable of suffering. And what this makes me wonder is whether or not you have come to the conclusion that it is morally permissible to eat animals under certain conditions.
Well, yes, as a consequentialist and a utilitarian, I have to think that there are some conditions under which it is justifiable to eat animals. One of them, which is perhaps the one that's most likely to occur to people today, is...
If the cat is interrupting you during the podcast, it is permissible to eat her?
I was not going to say that, no. That looks a very healthy cat who's enjoying his or her life, so sure, continue to do so. Now, I was going to say, if the meat is otherwise going to be thrown away, right? So in a different book that I wrote called The Ethics of What We Eat, which is about a whole lot of different questions about food, I went out with some freegans, so people who get their food from supermarket dumpster bins, and they would not eat meat. They would not buy meat. I mean, they did buy sometimes other foods. They couldn't entirely get everything they wanted from the dumpster bins, so they would sometimes buy food, but they would never buy meat. They would be vegan, in fact, if they were talking about purchasing. But if there was meat in a dumpster bin and it was still fresh and wholesome, or maybe it was canned, they would see nothing wrong with eating that, because if they hadn't hauled it out of the bin, it was just going to get thrown away. And so it would have no impact in contributing to the market for meat. It would have no impact in making meat, treating animals in factory farms a profitable venture. I've not eaten meat now. This said it was sort of 1970 that I became vegetarian, so that's a long time ago, more than 50 years ago, and I wouldn't really want to eat meat, so I probably wouldn't, but I would see nothing at all wrong with eating meat like that. Now, the other cases you mentioned, so Martha talked about meat from animals who are not sentient. Well, I think it's highly probable that oysters are not sentient, so that's another product which you can buy at markets or restaurants if you really want to eat something that is not vegetarian or vegan. I don't see anything wrong with eating oysters. And then there's the question that you also mentioned about, so suppose these animals have really good lives, and they're not even trucked off to a standard slaughterhouse. Let's say they're killed on the farm. They don't have any anticipation of their death. They're just killed instantly. And so here are these animals who have good lives. Now, what would be the effect of saying, no, I'm going to boycott even that farm? Well, it would mean, if lots of people did that, it would mean that the farm would go out of business. The producer is not going to keep animals, or certainly not the same number of animals, if they have to feed them and have to pay to feed them and look after them, and they can't sell any of the products from the animals. So is that a bad thing if that farm would go out of business? It depends a little on how you assess the immediate consequences and the general example you're setting. So as far as the animals are concerned, I think you could say, other things being equal, it would be a bad thing, because here are these animals having good lives, having no awareness of their death, and they wouldn't have existed at all. It's true that, of course, they could go on living good lives. Some people would just see the act of killing them as wrong. But if they're not killed, if they're simply allowed to live out their whole lives, nobody will want to buy their meat. It'll be too old and tough. And so there will be no animals living good lives in this particular property. And I think, you could plausibly argue that would be a loss of pleasure. And again, other things being equal, would be a bad thing. So then the question is, are other things equal? I mean, is it perhaps the case that by treating animals, this is a rather Kantian terminology, but treating them as a means to an end, you reinforce the idea that it's okay, they are just means to ends, and therefore not only that it's okay to rear them in these idyllic conditions, but to raise them in factory farms or to use them in painful experiments that are not really necessary to do immense amounts of good. And if that's the case, if it is going to have that bad consequence, you might say, look, it's better to just make a clean break and say, no, I don't eat animals. But I'm not sure about that. I think you could plausibly say, at least in some circumstances, that eating meat from those animals or eating eggs from free-range hens, which might be a similar sort of situation, is not actually harming animals on the whole.